The Immortal John Hancock here, and today I'm taking a look at some of the better arcade ports that came to the NES. That's right, the Nintendo Entertainment System had many excellent arcade ports, and today I'm taking a look at some of my favorite. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the video. First up is Jackal, known as Top Gunner in the arcades in the United States. And this is an awesome two-player experience in which you are saving POWs and delivering them to helicopter pads throughout this game. You're armed with a machine gun and a grenade thrower, which you can then upgrade to a missile launcher. And so this is a great arcade game, though admittedly I played the NES version first, and I think that does impact my opinion of the NES arcade versions because, you know, I lived out in the country as a kid and I didn't have a lot of chances to go and play arcade games. Although I had an arcade in my hometown, I didn't have a lot of experiences playing many different games. I played many of the same arcade games over and over. So, you know, the ability to play NES ports on my console was awesome. So here it is. This is the NES port of the arcade game Top Gunner in the United States. It was called Jackal so it wouldn't confuse people with Konami's other release, Top Gun. And so it still represents the arcade game. There were several differences with it, and so the game is now divided into 6 stages instead of taking place in one long level. There's bosses, and, you know, there's more maneuverability. They give you a little bit more room to move around, but I thought the NES version did a fantastic job of representing the arcade. Yes, it's different. Yes, the graphics aren't as good, but it's still two-player fun. I remember running this several times. I'd never owned it, but I did rent it several times. I thought it was a fun game to play with friends and, you know, blowing stuff up. You know, there's so many military games back in the day, and I enjoyed playing this quite a bit with friends. If you're looking for a good arcade port, look for this one. Bobble is a great arcade game in which you control Bubble Dragons Bub and Bob to rescue your girlfriends from cave monsters. This is a great two-player game. I was really kind of drawn to two-player games, a lot of multiplayer games, and, you know, this is another game that I played a lot more on the NES, but it did experience Bobble in the arcades. There is 100 levels with varying power-ups, bonus items, and enemies. This game is a lot of fun, and like many kids in the 80s, I was restricted to how much I could play this game in the arcades. You know, first and foremost, I was restricted to the large arcades that I could experience this game. This game was in Reading back in the day, but that was far from where I lived, and so I had to resort to the ports on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Luckily, the NES port of Bobble is pretty good. It's not the best home port of Bobble, but it's pretty decent. There is over 100 levels on the NES port, password feature, and the ability to steal life from a player if you run out. I love that. And there was multiple endings, 2 good and 2 bad. Now, the scoring is a little bit different in the home version, but, you know, I played this 10-1 versus the arcade, but I think it's a decent port. You know, this is a timeless classic for the NES. Many people consider this one of the better two-player games to play with friends, and I agree. This is still a very fun game to play and one that I revisit often. If you're looking for a good home port of Bobble, look no further than the NES, as it is a good port of the arcade game. One of the arcade games that I probably played the most as a child was the original Mario Brothers. Now, the reason why was that I found myself lasting longer on Mario Brothers versus classics such as Donkey Kong. I was able to get through several phases even as a child in the arcade. I really liked the gameplay, the bonus levels, the different enemies. I really like this game. Another two-player simultaneous game that you can play with friends, and I love that there was several home ports of this classic but I have to say that I played the NES version home port the most. Now, the arcade game is fantastic. If you haven't played the original Mario Brothers, it is well worth checking out. And you can pick this up on the Switch. The arcade version is available to purchase, and that's what I have done recently. Played a lot of Mario Brothers Arcade. Now, the NES version is not perfect. It is missing the introductions to stages, but I do think it is a good version of the arcade, and one that I played quite a bit back in the day. Because of my limitations to arcades, I still think it holds up. Now, it is not perfect. I know that there's some other versions of this game that are more arcade accurate, but I think the NES pulled off the original Mario Brothers decently. What the Nintendo did was it captured the spirit of the arcade in so many ports, and I think this is a good example. I really felt like it captured the spirit of Mario Brothers Arcade, and it's a good one. I am a big fan of the Cresta series, and admittingly, I played this one after playing other games in the Cresta series, so I actually experienced UFO RoboBhangarh first before I got to experience this in arcades. But, Dangar was in a local arcade, but this is a fantastic top-down shooter, and it's got some cool things in it. The neat thing in this game is that you can transform, you can gather parts of a ship, and then by formation, you can have pretty strong weaponry in the game. It's fast, and it kind of reminds me of a better version of Zevia. On a side note, if you're interested in checking out the arcade version of this game, it is available on the Switch and PS4, and I'm playing this currently on the Switch, and love the arcade version of this game. Like many other NES ports of arcade games, there definitely is a graphic scale down of this game, but the NES had such good gameplay that I think it still represents the arcade. Now, NES had pretty decent sound, and the NES version of Tera Cresta has really good soundtrack, and it includes all the cool gameplay aspects that made the arcade fun, including, the ship formation, in which you have pretty strong firepower. It is still a very challenging game. I'm not the best at top-down shooters, but I did enjoy this back in the day. I did rent it back in the day. It was available, and this was kind of a later release here in the States. And while this is definitely not the best shooter on the Nintendo Entertainment System, it still holds up. I recently went back and was playing Contra Arcade on the Konami Classics Collection on the Switch, and it just feels weird playing the arcade. Now, some out there, you may have experienced the arcade quite a bit and have a different opinion than me, but, playing the arcade version of Contra, the graphics, don't get me wrong, look amazing. The layout's a little bit different. There's definitely different level design, but it just feels different. I played the Nintendo version so much that going back and experiencing the arcade, it was a weird trip. While the graphics significantly looked better on the arcade, I just felt the gameplay was just a little bit slower. And so, some people may disagree, that's okay. But going back and playing the arcade, while it has many of the aspects that the NES version had, it just felt different. And part of that is because I played the NES version so much. The home version of Contra has such a special place in my heart. I played this with several friends, bought it back in the day. It was one of the many games that I got to experience renting and eventually purchasing it with my own money. Contra is, still one of the best games on the NES library. It's a fantastic arcade port. There's several differences. Most noticeably, the graphics are scaled down, but I felt the gameplay really was tight. I really enjoyed this game, still play it to this day. It was fun kind of doing the Konami code for this game. And I think it represents what the Nintendo could pull off, While the Nintendo couldn't do the graphics of many arcade ports, it was able to do the music and the gameplay to the point where it was good enough. And Contra is a fantastic arcade port. Several layouts of levels are different, as well as bosses, but it is a good arcade port. This is just a fraction of some of the excellent arcade ports that came to the NES. What are your favorite? Comment below, as I would love to hear from you. This is going to be a multiple part series, and I hope to do more of these, as I am a big fan of the NES and its amazing library. There's so many timeless classics. This is a perfect time to go back and play some of the classics of a previous time, a more simpler time. And thank you so much for continuing to watch my channel and my videos. It is most appreciated. Be well, stay safe. This is the Immortal John Hancock. You take care.